Today's story: the place where people go at 4 a.m. I think I'm a fortunate man. I haven't lost many people close to me to something other than natural causes. Usually it's some distant relative I knew nothing about, or it's a friend of a friend that I met maybe once. It's not that I don't care that some people die earlier than they should, or are caught in an accident, or exit on their own terms. It hurts me just as much as anyone. But something in the back of my mind always says, at least they're still here. That kind of thinking put me in a very fragile state. One day I lost someone I never thought that I'd lose that way. My grandfather. As old as he wasn't willing to wait the few years that he had left. He didn't want to give those who loved him the joy of his company for the sake of his escape. His word for it, not mine. Now, I felt the emotions that you would expect. I was sad one day, pissed off the next, and then just plain pretending he never existed. A lot of bad things started to happen after that, and maybe it was just the reality of loss setting into my mind and making me do dumb things. That didn't stop me from blaming him for everything. All the pain I felt, all the obstacles I faced, it started with him. Normally, that would be the end of my rant. I would bitch about his selfishness, pop a few pills to help me sleep, and that would be another day in my miserable existence. I should say I never go overboard. I always take the recommended dosage, not one pill more. I'm depressed, not stupid. It was one day after all the work was done that I got to bed late. I normally wouldn't need pills after such a long day. The exhaustion would just catch up with me. Only it had become habit by this point. So without really thinking, I counted out the pills and chased them down with half a glass of room temperature water. I groaned for a moment, realizing it was a waste of a dose. I just rolled over and let my body and the pills race to see who knocked me out first. I think my last thought was about the alarm clock and if it would be loud enough to wake me up. I ended up waking before it could go off, 4 a.m. I woke up in a daze early that morning. I felt different. Parts of me were still asleep, and I chalked it up to me taking the pills a little too late into the night. I forced myself out of bed, avoiding the beams of light. The morning sun was shooting through the gaps in the curtains. Staring at them too long made me sneeze for some reason. I also felt a little nauseous, like something was wrong with me all over. We've all had days where we woke up and our brain was so out of it that we thought we were on a different plane of existence, a different planet perhaps. I woke up to feeling like my body was different, and I couldn't quite remember how. I went through the usual morning rituals until it was time to go. I pulled on a hoodie and a cap, looked at myself in the mirror, and sighed. It was time to return to the routine. I opened the door to my apartment, stepped outside, and didn't fully register what I saw. I turned around as I closed the door, twisting the key and locking it. With a deep yawn, I took those first few steps down the hallway and stopped almost immediately. There was no hallway. I'm going to do my best to describe what I saw, not because I struggle to remember. The image of that place is burned into my memory. I'm going to describe it in detail because I'm hoping that it will be familiar to someone out there, someone who might have seen it as well. At least, I hope that someone else has, and I'm not crazy. I was on a suburban street. The door that I had just locked was for a house, not an apartment. The house was this gray-green olive or moss kind of green color. Something like that. It had a dark roof with a white chimney and a separate garage. The path leading to the street was this beige, stone-inlaid tile thing. There were other houses, some wood-slatted inside of painted concrete and brick walls, like mine. Some had fences, tall metal ones with jagged, spiked tops, the kind of fences I would imagine outside a military encampment, not your typical suburban house. There was a street, but it led into a dark tunnel on either side. The most bizarre thing was the sky. The sun wasn't really up. It wasn't really there. It's the hardest thing to describe, but imagine that you're in a box without a top. You look up and see this rust-colored sky, and beyond the lip of the box is the sun, out of sight. But you somehow know that it isn't the sun. It's a light source, but it lacked any of that natural warmth. Not that there was anything natural about anything else in this place. It was all strangely still, quiet, empty, and abandoned. The kind of surreal place that feels like it was once filled with life, but not anymore. A film set, but the actors have all gone home for the day. I turned back to the house and tried to get back inside. The key wouldn't turn. It didn't even match the same type of lock anymore. It had changed. I shouldered my backpack and looked at my neighbors' houses. Or at least I think they were my neighbors, if this can even be called my house. I didn't see any movement, not in their living rooms or their kitchens. I walked onto the pavement and noticed that I was mouth-breathing. It had gotten louder and more labored. It was obvious that panic was setting in, but panic wasn't what I felt. It felt like nothing had changed since I woke up. The parts of me that were asleep were still asleep. I had this all-over body fatigue. That didn't stop me from running towards the first sign of movement. That could be a mistake. People were walking out of the dark tunnel. A lot of people. All of them were fixed on the tunnel at the end of the street. It was like watching one of those charity walks, seeing the masses going together. But none of them wore tight yoga pants, carried water bottles, or had earphones blasting music. If anything, their expression and the shambling way that they marched reminded me of a prison chain gang from the old movies. A real sense of hopelessness. They were people who seemed to have given up on doing anything else but slowly stumbling forward. I would come to discover this much when I noticed someone walking up the pavement towards me. It was this tall guy with a white tank top and dusty jeans. He seemed strangely wrong to look at. It was as if my mind kept trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Again, if I could describe it better, the closest feeling to that mental short circuit was how some nights before I go to bed, everything feels out of proportion, as if I can't picture myself without this giant head or cartoonish limbs or something. Yet there was this one constant that was his clothing, this white tank top and dusty jeans. He placed a hand on my shoulder before I knew it, and guided me into the crowd. He even pulled me along until I was walking with them. The moment I started walking, he let go and returned to the pavement to walk alongside us. "I'm not a part of this," I murmured. I turned to the closest person next to me, a middle-aged lady in the polka-dot dress. It didn't fit her, but she didn't look bad either. "Hi, hello. Can you tell me where we're walking? What's..." To this day, I can't help but recall the pain in her eyes. She only glanced at me for a second, a split fucking second, and then looked ahead again, Tears started running down her cheeks, and she moaned softly, as if to say a name. It was just these wide brown eyes melting, and looking at her was painful. I was grateful when we entered the tunnel. The darkness was all-consuming, hiding our forms. I could hear people bumping against each other again, grunts and hisses. Eventually, I was just walking blind. I started to bump into people, though I could make out some of their footsteps. It seemed they went slower in the tunnels, and I didn't mind. I tried to match their pace. My breathing may have been labored, and my body may have ached, but somehow I couldn't slip into the panic that the rest of me was having. I didn't think too much about it. I just didn't see the point. I decided to keep walking through that dark tunnel. I stumbled sometimes. A lot of people did. There was this one moment where I stumbled forward, and I put my hands up to catch myself in case I fell flat on my face. Instead, I stumbled into the guy in front of me, pushing him a little bit forwards. "Sorry," I said, trying to regain my balance. I heard this strange sound. I couldn't sense his presence anymore. His footsteps stopped, and I knew that nobody was there. I wanted to say something else, but I didn't know if I had any right to. After all, when you bump into someone and apologize, you've pretty much done all that you can do. I wasn't about to fight this guy for not saying anything or moving away. I saw the light, and after 3 minutes of steady walking, we were back outside again. Quite a few people were walking in front of me, but a lot more behind me. I also saw the impossible man walking alongside on the pavement again. There was another one, just like him, walking on the other side. They must have known what was going on, so I figured that I would ask the one who had guided me into the crowd. Nearing the edge, I was about to say something, but then all eyes were on the house. My house. It was the same street, the same sky. I didn't pay enough attention to notice it first, but there it was, the moss green house. The front door opened up, and a man walked out. His jaw dropped as he looked out at this world. 2 people broke from the crowd and ran towards him, but the man in the white tank top didn't let them. He stepped in front of them and pushed them back into the crowd with such force that they were sent flying. Several people were knocked down, but they got up and continued walking. The tall man was impossibly strong and surprisingly fast. He had grabbed the new guy by the neck, and he guided him into the crowd as well, closing the door behind him. No screams, nothing. The old man was a fish out of water being guided back into the sea. That must have been exactly how I looked when I appeared. I looked around to see if anyone noticed. I looked for the woman in the polka dot dress, but she was nowhere in sight. I also realized that the crowd had thinned out just before we entered the tunnel again. I was still walking with them. I saw it when I looked back at the fading light, a brief flash of dark lines shooting from the shadows of the tunnels and occasionally pulling people up. My body felt the fear. It knew that it was in line at the slaughterhouse. That's why everyone looked the way they did. That's why they slowed down. It was quieter that way, perhaps making it more difficult to be attacked. Only, the slower you walked, the longer you were in the tunnel, too. I listened in that tunnel. Actually listened. I could hear more than the soft footsteps of the crowd. I heard an odd whistle. It was as if something was passing by me very closely, like a bullet just barely missing, but softer than that. Even if they couldn't hit us all the time, it was still a game of chance. When I saw the light again, I felt an incredible sense of relief. I think my body acted on it, and I stepped a little eagerly. I shifted at the last moment, but something ran past the back of my leg. I crumbled to the ground just outside the tunnel. When I got up, I saw the back of my leg had been cut. The wound wasn't anything serious. The blood would stop soon. But it was a close call. The tall man stopped outside the tunnel to look at me. I quickly got to my feet and continued walking. I still felt drained, but some semblance of fear was still pushing me forward. Nothing more happened for a while. No doors opened, no new people. The crowd just seemed to thin out. I started to take my time in the tunnels and make a conscious effort to be quiet. Very quiet, quieter than I've ever been. But it was only a matter of time, and I knew that. I tried calling for help, but there wasn't any signal on my phone, which still read the time as being 4 a.m. I had a few things with me, but most of it was useless. ID, passport with a study visa, my homework, work uniform, and a lousy packed lunch that I did not have the appetite for. Yet, my time came. I put myself at the front of the crowd and looked out towards the house. I watched the door closely. It was that same house, always the same house. The door opened, and I ran. I thought the tall man was well behind, but no. He shot out of the tunnel and towards me the moment I stepped onto the pavement. The new one stepped outside. "Don't close the door!" I yelled. It worked. Well, I think my yelling scared her more than she listened. She was still in shock. She hesitated. The tall man's steps had grown loud. I decided to duck at just the right time. But it snatched my backpack. It was easy to slip out of the slings and then dive towards the house. The woman tried to close it at the last moment, her eyes locked on the tall man instead of me. I grabbed her hand and pulled her in with me. She resisted, but thank God for momentum, because I carried her through with the force of my leap. We crashed back inside of her home. I flipped onto my back and kicked the door closed, shutting out that rust-colored hellscape. For the longest time, I didn't know what to think. The woman was yelling at me in a language that I didn't comprehend. It was fast and hard to keep up with. She opened the door and ran outside. I screamed for her to stop, but then I saw it was not the hellscape that I had seen before. It was a sunny street, packed with people and cars. Beyond it was a busy beach. Stepping out, I found myself walking along a beach in Spain. I lost my phone in my backpack, but I still had my wallet and my passport in my pocket. Some people spoke English and were very helpful in getting me to the airport. I bought a ticket home before someone realized that I didn't have a visa to visit Spain. That had me feeling real panic, going to the airport, not that numb fear that I felt in that place. No, I don't think that the sleeping pills had anything to do with this event. I've been taking them for years, and I'm pretty sure that they would have added them to the list of side effects, if anything like that ever happened before. That's one hell of a side effect. The only real reason I can think that it happened was this random fact that I came across that matched my experience in a small way. It was some bullshit that at 4 a.m. everybody is in their weakest state and the most likely to die in their sleep. Of course, that makes no sense to me, because what if you went to sleep later or earlier? It just doesn't scan. But I think I know how that rumor started. I think it's that place, that street, that tunnel. I think that's what killed so many people and created this rumor. Only I was lucky enough to escape with just a scratch on my leg and a sizable dent in my bank account. I don't think that I'm the only one who could have escaped. There's nothing special about me. Some must have made it out the same way as me, or took a look at the street and went back inside the house before closing the door. I just don't know for sure, but I think that that is the place where people go at 4 a.m. What a strange location and sequence of events. What do you think this could be? The fact that he woke up in Spain takes away the concept of it being a night terror. Of course, maybe he could have just forgotten that he was on a vacation or something. Seems a strange thing to forget, I know. Seems unlikely. So what do you suppose happened? Where do you suppose he was? And who do you suppose those beings were? Let me know in the comments below. And I thank you for joining me, and hope you'll be here once more for some Frail Blaze tales in the future.